Section 8 of British Seabirds by Charles Dixon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5 Ducks, Geese and Swans, Part 2. Golden Eye. Misled by the variations of colour, due to age, sex or season, in this species Linnaeus described different examples of it under the names of Anas clangula and A. glaucion, whilst even in our own day the females and immature birds are known as morillons, and regarded as distinct from the much rarer adult males, or golden eyes, which are locally termed rattle-wings or whistlers, from the noise produced by the wings during flight. The golden eye forms the type of the well-marked genus Clangula of Fleming and of Boy, and is known to most modern ornithologists as C. glaucion. The male is a singularly striking and beautiful bird, with the general colour of the upper parts black, shot with metallic green tints on the head, which is adorned with a small, yet distinct, drooping crest, with a large white patch at the base of the bill under each eye, and with the drooping, elongated scapulars, and the under parts white. The female is much less conspicuous, the black being replaced with dark brown, the elongated scapulars are wanting, and the spot under the eyes only faintly indicated. The white double alar speculum is, however, very strongly marked in both sexes. The golden eye is certainly more addicted to fresh water than the sea, and in most cases only quits these inland lakes and ponds, when continued frost compels it to do so. It then prefers such coasts as are low-lying, especially delighting in estuaries. It usually arrives in the British Islands in October, and remains in them until the following April or May. It is not so gregarious as some of the other ducks, and generally assembles in parties rather than in flocks, the larger gatherings being caused by exceptional circumstances. Its habits very closely resemble those of allied birds. It is seldom seen on the land, and there walks with a waddling gait peculiar to most ducks. On the water, however, it is active and graceful enough, swimming well, and diving with great celerity, usually seeking by this means to escape from danger. The note of this duck is a low croaking kurr, uttered both when the bird is flying and when at rest. Its food consists of crustaceans, molluscs, small fish, and various water plants and weeds. Most of this is obtained by diving, and whilst a flock of birds is feeding, several individuals keep watch, all never diving together. The evidence for this duck having bred in Scotland is neither reliable nor conclusive. The golden eye breeds throughout the Arctic and subarctic regions in Europe, Asia, and America, up to the limits of the growth of trees. Its winter range extends to the tropics. It retires to its northern summer haunts with the first signs of spring. The favourite breeding resorts of this duck are tracts of more open forest country, where the woods are full of swamps and lakes, and the timber contains plenty of holes. The nest is usually made in a hollow tree, in a hole in the trunk, or in a hollow branch, sometimes as many as 30 feet from the ground, whilst the partiality of the bird for a tree near a waterfall or running stream has been noticed by more than one observer. The nest consists entirely of the down plucked from the female's body. The 10 or 12 eggs are laid in May or June, and are bright green in colour. The nest hole is never made by the duck itself. The peasants of northern Scandinavia place hollow logs in suitable places on the tree trunks, which the golden eyes appear readily to avail themselves of, and from which the eggs and down are systematically taken. The young are conveyed to the ground, one by one, pressed between the female's bill and her breast. The male is not known to assist in the task of incubation, but may possibly do so. Long-tailed Duck. This beautiful and remarkably elegant species, the Anas glacialis of Linnaeus, and the Fuligula or Herdula glacialis of modern writers, is another winter visitor to the British seas. It is only of somewhat rare occurrence in our southern waters, but northwards, off the Scotch coasts, it becomes more frequent, and in certain localities, notably the Hebrides and the Orkneys and Shetlands, even abundant. In the latter islands it is locally known as the Calloo. In other parts of Scotland the clear gabbling cry of this duck has been freely translated into the words Col an can na licht. To many American gunners the bird is known as Old Squaw, from its oft-repeated cries. The male bird is singularly graceful in appearance, his long, black central tail feathers projecting 5 inches beyond the remaining white ones. The head and neck are white, but on either side, below the ears, is a dark brown circular patch. The gorget and the upper parts generally are black, against which, however, the long elongated white scapulars are very conspicuous. The underparts, below the gorget, are white. The female is much less showy, the black parts in the male being dark brown in this sex, and the white parts are suffused with brown. The elongated scapulars are wanting. During exceptionally severe weather the long-tailed Duck sometimes approaches our coasts in unusual numbers, and in districts where it is generally a scarce bird. This Duck is a late migrant, seldom reaching even our most northerly coasts before November. It returns north in April, and is strictly marine in its haunts during winter, often wandering long distances from land, and approaching the shore usually under pressure of stormy weather. Then it shows a decided preference for rock-bound coasts, frequenting the creeks and inlets which afford a considerable amount of shelter. The long-tailed Duck is gregarious at this season, like most of its kind, although the flocks are seldom or never so large as the gatherings of scoters and others. Its flight is remarkably quick, the long tail making the bird look extremely elegant. It is also an expert diver, disappearing as quick as thought, and often going for long distances beneath the surface, like a grebe or a shag. It obtains most of its food by diving, and, like the Eider, often comes shorewards with the tide. It feeds in deeper water too than many of its allies, as much of its prey is captured, not at the bottom, but floating in the sea. This food consists of small molluscs, crustaceans, minute marine animals, insects, and water plants and weeds. Its note may be described as a loud calloo. The long-tailed Duck breeds in the Arctic regions of Europe, Asia, and North America, above the limits of forest growth and, possibly, as far north as land exists. During summer it frequents inland pools and lakes, odd pairs taking possession of the former, many pairs congregating on the latter. The birds arrive in the Arctic regions with the break-up of the ice, congregating in the pools amongst the floes. The nest is usually placed in some sheltered nook, amongst birch and willow scrub, in long grass, or on the drifted rubbish by the banks of the subsided rivers. It is little more than a hollow, lined with down. In this, during June or early July, from 7 to 12 buffish green eggs are laid by the female. It is a most remarkable fact that the drake of this species assists the Duck in bringing up the young, but not, so far as I can learn, in incubating the eggs. During the whole breeding season this Duck is remarkably tame, loath to take wing, and swimming out into the centre of the lake for safety if threatened by danger. The winter migrations of this Duck are not very extended, the Mediterranean basin perhaps marking the extreme southern limits. Mergansers. The Mergansers are a well-defined little group of fish-eating ducks, forming the sub-family Merginae. They are characterised by their slender narrow bill, furnished on both upper and lower mandible with saw-like lamellae or denticulations. The head is always more or less crested. In most other respects they resemble the diving ducks, all the species seeking for their food by diving. The sexes differ in colour of plumage, but not, perhaps, to such a marked extent as in some other divisions of the Antidae. 6 species of Mergansers are known to science, of which 4 are included in the British list, one as a rare visitor from North America. Of the remaining 2 species, one inhabits South America, the other the Auckland Islands. The young, as usual, are hatched covered with down, and are able soon to follow the female to the water. In their moulting and progress to maturity they resemble preceding species. Red-breasted Merganser. This handsome seabird, the Mergus serrator of Linnaeus and most modern ornithologists, is unfortunately a winter visitor only to English waters. In Scotland and Ireland, however, it is one of the most familiar coast birds all the year round. The red-breasted Merganser cannot readily be confused with any other Duck. The crested head and upper neck are black, shot with green and purple. The lower neck and upper breast are buff, streaked with black, the feathers on the sides of the breast having broad black margins. The flanks are strongly vermiculated with black, the back is black, vermiculated with grey on the lower portions, the inner scapulars are black, the outer ones white, the speculum is white, barred with black, and the underparts, except the flanks, are white. The female has the head and neck reddish-brown, and the upper parts brown. The black bordered feathers on the sides of the breast are absent. Although found in many inland districts, the favourite resorts of the red-breasted Merganser are wild rocky coasts, such as contain plenty of quiet bays and creeks and lochs studded with islands. Waters where the bottom is sandy or rocky are preferred to those in which it is composed of mud. Many birds of this species visit our coasts for the winter from more northern haunts, whilst some of those dwelling in Scottish waters draw southwards at that season. This merganser is more or less gregarious, and may be met with in flocks out at sea, or during rough weather sheltering nearer the land in lochs. Early in spring, and onwards through the summer, the red-breasted merganser lives closely in pairs, flying and feeding in company. I have noticed that this bird visits certain spots to feed very regularly, according to the state of the tide. Almost to the minute I could depend upon certain pairs passing certain spots on their way to those feeding grounds. I know a few prettier sights than the actions of a pair of mergansers in some quiet deep sea loch in early summer. The birds swim side by side close inshore below the rocks, first one diving, and then another, rarely if ever both descending at the same time when feeding, but when engaged in courtship the drake will pursue the duck and splash about in the water in a most uproarious way, often diving after her in the eagerness of his chase. The bird swims well, if rather low in the water, and dives head foremost with a leap just like the shag. The food of this species consists largely of fish, but crustaceans, crabs especially, and molluscs are also devoured. Most of this food is obtained whilst diving, each capture being brought to the surface to be swallowed, the bird drinking after doing so, and not unfrequently rising 3 parts out of the water and flapping its wings. The note is a guttural kurr, heard chiefly during flight. The bird flies well and rapidly when once free from the water, but often flaps along the surface for several yards before that is accomplished. The red-breasted merganser breeds in May, the eggs being laid during the latter half of that month, and the first half of June. Although not gregarious during this period, it is, at any rate, social, for several pairs may be found nesting very close together, if keeping somewhat to themselves. An island is always preferred to the mainland. The nest is placed under a rock or bank, in a rabbit burrow, or amongst dense heather and gorse at no great distance from the water. In many cases the eggs are laid upon the bare ground, in others a few dry vegetable fragments are collected into a slight hollow, but a plentiful bed of down gradually accumulates around them. From 8 to 12 olive-grey eggs are laid, upon which the female alone sits. The male, however, is in attendance on the water near by, and the duck joins him there during the short periods that she leaves her charge to feed and to bathe. If alarmed, the hen bird slips off very quietly. When the young are hatched the drake retires to moult, and the female brings them up unaided. Outside our islands this merganser is widely distributed over the northern parts of Europe, Asia, and America, drawing southwards in winter. Goosander. As this beautiful duck, the Mergus merganser of ornithologists, not only occurs in some numbers in British waters as a winter visitor, but breeds sparingly within our limits, it has some claim to be included in the present volume, although it cannot be regarded as a very striking feature in coast bird life. It is also far less exclusively marine than the preceding species. The goosander is an even more handsome bird than the red-breasted merganser, and is the largest species in the present sub-family. The colours of the male are arranged in a most effective and strongly contrasted way. The head and neck are dark metallic green, the breast is a delicate and beautiful pink, the upper parts and the wings are black and white, the underparts below the breast white. The female has the head reddish-brown, the upper parts greyish-brown or pale chestnut, the lower buffish-white. In its habits and in the haunts it frequents, the goosander very closely resembles its smaller ally. When, in winter, frequenting the coast it delights in the bays and fjords, but occasionally wanders to less precipitous shores, notably estuaries and the mouths of tidal rivers. It is a remarkably agile bird in the water, swimming and diving with equal ease, but on the land its movements are ungainly, the bird wriggling along with its breast almost touching the ground, in a very diver-like manner. In diving it often descends to a great depth. Although not often seen much on shore, it possesses the cormorant-like habit of basking on some rock jutting from the water, sitting with its body upright and wings half expanded. Its food consists of fish, crabs, molluscs, and aquatic insects. Most of this is obtained whilst the bird is diving. The goosander, in our islands, is as yet only known to breed in a few localities in the Highlands. Its eggs are laid during April and May. Its favourite nesting haunts are open, swampy forests, containing lakes and rocky streams. The nest is generally made in a hole in a tree, but crevices in rocks or cavities in exposed tree roots by the waterside are sometimes selected. But little nest is made, although when the full clutch of eggs is deposited a thick and abundant bed of down surrounds them. The eggs are from 8 to 12 in number, creamy white and glossy. It is not known whether the drake assists in the duty of incubation. The goosander has a wide geographical range, which extends over Arctic and North Temperate Europe, Asia and America, and more southern areas during winter. Smew. This species, the Mergus albellus of systematists, is not only the smallest of the mergansers, but by far the least common in British waters. Its visits are chiefly confined to the eastern coast line of England and Scotland, and the south coast of England. Even in these areas adult males, from their strongly contrasted black and white plumage locally known as nuns, are much more rarely met with than females and young birds, called by the gunners of the east coast red-headed smews. Although the male smew is a bird that does not approach the coast much, and the female, from her duller coloration and small size, is readily overlooked. Lastly, it is the least maritime of the family. The male smee or smew in neutral plumage is black and white, some of the former colour displayed in curious crescentic markings on the shoulders and in front of the wings. The elongated crest is pearly white, emphasised by greenish black, and the flanks are finely vermiculated with grey. The female has the head reddish brown. During winter the smew is gregarious, living in flocks of 30 or 40 individuals, mostly immature. It prefers the more open water at some distance from shore, seeking to evade pursuit by swimming, but, if fired at, diving at once and reappearing far out of danger. When feeding, most of the birds dive at once, rising in scattered order, but soon bunching together as each bird swims to a central rallying point. The smew does not visit the land much, and even sleeps upon the water. It is a most accomplished diver, descending to great depths, and using its wings to assist it through the water, which it traverses with as much ease as a cormorant or an auk. Upon our coast its food consists principally of small fishes and crustaceans. Its note is a harsh kurr, but at its breeding grounds it is said to utter a bell-like call, hence in northern Asia it has been called the bell duck. The smew breeds in the forest swamps of the Arctic regions, making its nest in a hollow fallen log, or in a hole in a tree or stump. The eggs are laid upon the powdered wood, but are eventually surrounded by a quantity of down from the body of the parent. The 7 or 8 eggs, creamy white in colour, are laid late in June or early in July. The ducklings are said to be conveyed to the water by the female in her bill. Geese. The geese form an extensive and well-defined subfamily of the Antidae, termed Anserinæ. They are distinguished from their allies by having the lores covered with feathers, and the tarsus reticulated back and front. The geese differ further from the swans, in having a relatively longer tarsus and much shorter neck, and from the ducks by their short, robust, subconical bill. Geese frequent both land and water, inland districts as well as the coasts and seas. The sexes do not present such striking contrasts of colour as in the ducks. Geese moult once in the year, in autumn. The distribution of the subfamily is almost a cosmopolitan one, but the New World contains the greatest number of species. Half a dozen species are more or less abundant visitors to our islands in winter, but one species only breeds within our limits, and even this has been extirpated from most of its ancient haunts. But one species only breeds within our limits, and even this has been extirpated from most of its ancient haunts. These half-dozen species divide themselves into 2 distinct groups, 4 of them consisting of the grey geese, and 2 of the black geese. The birds in the former group are the least maritime in their haunts, visiting the land to feed, whilst those in the latter division are inseparably associated with the sea during their sojourn in our area. As the former group contains the familiar wild goose, which is the original stock from which the farmyard goose has been derived, we will deal first with the species contained in it. Grey-lag goose. This fine bird, the type of the genus Anser, and the Anser cinereus of most modern writers, claims distinction not only as being the origin of the domestic race, but as the one species indigenous to the British Islands. For nearly 100 years, however, the grey-lag goose has ceased to breed in its old haunts, the English fens. It continues to breed, yet very locally, in the Hebrides, and in certain parts of the Highlands. Its domestication must extend to a very ancient date, yet captivity, beyond increasing its size and its fecundity, has caused but trifling variation in its colour. The bird, therefore, must be too familiar to every reader to require any description here. Once apparently so common, the grey-lag goose is now one of our rarest birds, a fact of great significance to the student of the geographical distribution or dispersal of species. The derivation of one of this bird's trivial names, lag, has given rise to much speculation, until Professor Skeat apparently solved the riddle by suggesting that the word, which is an equivalent for late, applied to the bird's habit of lagging behind to breed in the fens, after other migratory geese had departed north. A few grey lag geese locally appear, chiefly on our eastern seaboard in winter, and it is more than probable that, normally, most of these birds are the individuals still continuing to habit the British Islands. These birds generally resort to the coast, frequenting sandbanks and low islands during the day, as a safe retreat in which to rest and sleep, coming landwards again at dusk to feed. This goose, although gregarious during winter, seldom or never consorts with other species, although ready enough to mingle with its tame descendants on the stubbles and pastures. Where not persecuted, this duck is a day feeder, but incessant shooting has caused it to vary its habits in this respect, and to defer its visits to dangerous grounds until darkness has set in. It shows little partiality for water, only resorting thereto when alarmed, or during the helpless period of its moult, when its quills all drop out together and incapacitate it for flight. It swims well and buoyantly, however, and when wounded has been known to dive. The flight of this species is both rapid and powerful, the birds usually forming into V's or W's to perform their journeys. The call note is a loud, far-sounding gag gag, variously modulated on different occasions. Its food consists largely of grass and tender grain plants, but grain of all kinds is sought, together with various buds and leaves. The grey lag goose breeds early, in some localities the eggs being laid in March or April, a month later in the more northern districts. It is a social bird at this period, and numbers of nests are often made close together. Its breeding grounds are secluded moors and swamps. The huge nest, made on the ground, is placed amongst heath or dense vegetation, and is composed of branches of heather, dry grass, rushes, bracken, turf, and so on, and lined with down. The 6 or 8 eggs are creamy white. The gander keeps guard close to the nest, whilst the goose incubates the eggs, and when the young are reared a move is usually made seawards. White-fronted Goose. This goose, the Branta albifrons of Skopole, but the Anser albifrons of most modern writers, is a winter visitor to our islands, not only local in distribution, but much more abundant in some years than others. It may be readily distinguished from the preceding species by its orange-yellow bill, white face, a narrow and varying line of white feathers round the base of the bill, and broad black bars across the belly. It is, perhaps, most abundant on the Irish coasts, those of the south and south-west of England coming next, whilst on the east coast, a region so famous for wildfowl, it becomes rare. In Scotland its principal resorts are in the Outer Hebrides. The habits of all these grey geese are very much alike. During winter the present species is gregarious, and passes with great regularity from the sandbanks, where it rests and sleeps, to the more inland pastures where it feeds. Its food, flight and actions generally resemble those of allied birds. The note is said to be more harsh and cackling than that of the preceding species, hence the name Laughing Goose applied in many places to this bird. The white-fronted goose breeds in the Arctic regions, and was met with by Middendorf breeding in great numbers on the Siberian tundras. The nest was a mere hollow at the summit of a grassy knoll, lined with down. The eggs, from 5 to 7 in number, are creamy white. Bean Goose. This species, the Anas segatum of Gmelin and the Anser segatum of modern ornithologists, is locally distributed round the British coast during winter, but of more general occurrence on passage, especially in autumn. The Bean Goose may be distinguished from the 2 preceding geese by the colour of its bill, which has only the central portion orange-yellow, the base and the nail being black. This species arrives in our area during October and November. It is gregarious during winter, congregating in flocks of varying size, which wander about considerably, influenced by the exigencies of the weather and the supply of food. These gatherings are difficult to approach. During the day the Bean Geese come inland to search for their food, on the stubbles and newly sown grain lands. A long continued frost will keep them to the coast, but during spells of open yet rough and stormy weather, they prefer to remain in inland haunts, from which, however, they soon depart at the sign of a coming frost. When feeding, Bean Geese generally station sentinels to guard the flock by giving timely notice of the approach of an enemy. Their food consists of grass, grain, tender shoots of grain, and the roots of various plants. During night, when they are certainly more easily approached, they repair to sandbanks and low islands, or to the open sea, where they sleep and preen their feathers. This Goose swims well, but rises from water in a somewhat laboured manner. Its note is the familiar gag-gag, variously modulated according to circumstances. The Bean Goose breeds on the Arctic tundras, beyond or near the limits of forest growth, across Europe and Asia, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The nest is made early in June, amongst the tall grass and sedge of an islet on one of the tundra lakes, or on rising ground on the bank, and is merely a hollow into which is gathered a little dry grass and a quantity of down from the body of the parent. In this nest 3 or 4 creamy white eggs are laid. As soon as the young are half grown, the Bean Geese begin to collect into flocks again, and to complete their moult. Like other geese, at this time they are very helpless, being incapable of flight, as the quills drop out suddenly and nearly altogether. Allusion here must be made to the pink-footed goose, the Anser brachyrhynchus of Baillon, long confounded with the Bean Goose, and perhaps only subspecifically distinct from it. As pointed out by Mr. Cecil Smith, the characters mainly depended upon to distinguish this bird from the Bean Goose, pink legs and central portion of the bill, are not constant, but this may be due to accidental reversion. A more important difference, because apparently constant, is the bluish-grey colour of the upper wing coverts. These, however, are questions that do not come within the scope of the present volume, and must be left to the more advanced students of birds. The pink-footed goose is a tolerably common winter visitor to our islands, especially to the eastern districts. Its habits are not known to differ in any important respect, but little is known of its habits during the breeding season. The nest is said to be made on low rocks near the sea, or on the higher cliffs in the fjords some distance inland. The 4 or 5 eggs are creamy white. Brent Goose. The Black Geese differ in many important respects from their allies, the Grey Geese, and are generally separated from them under the scientific terms of bernicla or branter. These birds are characterised by their short, sub-conical bills, in which the lamellae are concealed, or nearly so, and by the general dark colour of the plumage, relieved by white, or, in some cases, variously strongly contrast colours. 2 species are British, in the sense of visiting us during winter. The first of these, the Brent Goose, the Anser brenta of Brisson, and the Binocular brenta of modern naturalists, is by far the most common and widely distributed of the geese in our islands, but it exclusively confines itself to the sea. It may be met with off almost all parts of our coastline, but is most abundant along the east and south. The adult bird may readily be distinguished by the general black coloration of the breast and upper parts, relieved by small white patches on the sides of the neck, the pale margins to the wing coverts and mantle, and the white upper tail coverts. The lower parts below the breast are dark slate gray, many of the feathers having paler margins. Young birds, however, do not display the white neck patches. The Brent Goose is seldom seen in any numbers on our seas before October, but from that date onwards the vast flocks continue to arrive, and the bird continues abundant until the end of the following March. Certainly some districts are far more favoured by this species than others. In my own experience I may name the Wash, where I have seen this goose in such enormous packs as densely to cover many acres of mudflat, whilst their noisy clamour, in the still hours of early morning, could be heard for a mile or more across the wide desolate salt marshes. The Brent Goose passes its time either on the sea or on the muds. It is remarkably gregarious, young and old congregating together, wary and watchful always, and never allowing a close approach on the land. So densely do the birds pack, that a disturbed flock taking wing looks as though the very surface of this mud or sea were rising in one solid inseparable mass. The principal food of this goose consists of grass, wrack, and lava. On certain mud banks these plants grow very thickly, and to these the Brents resort as soon as the tide recedes sufficiently for them to reach and tear up their favourite food. In studied order the birds advance, feeding as they come, sentinels remaining on the look out in turn until all are satisfied, or the incoming tide covers their food plants. Then back, in a solid mass, they go towards the open sea, or to some low bank, there to rest and preen their plumage, and to wait until another tide has ebbed and left exposed their pastures. This bird, for the most part, is a day feeder, but during moonlight nights it will visit the exposed banks, doubtless the tide having considerable influence on its habits in this respect. The flight of this goose, if rather laboured, is powerful and well sustained, and during its progression the birds often form into V's or W's, or some other lineal pattern. The note of the Brent goose is a loud, oft repeated, and variously modulated hank or honk, uttered not only when the bird is on the ground, but during flight. But very little is known of the nidification of the Brent goose. It breeds in the highest Arctic latitudes, selecting, if possible, an island near the coast, making a rude nest in some hollow in the ground, of dry grass, stalks of plants, and moss, and warmly lined with down. The 4 or 5 eggs are creamy white in colour. The gander keeps watch and ward near the nest, whilst the goose incubates the eggs. By the end of July most of the Brent geese begin to moult, and during some part of the time they are quite incapable of flight. At this critical period they keep closely to the sea. Mr. Trevor Batty, in his interesting book, Ice Bound on Kolguev, gives a graphic description of the way the Samoyeds captured the Brent goose whilst it is incapable of flight. Instinctively aware of their helplessness, the geese endeavour to get to the sea, and on it congregate in large flocks until their quills have grown. But the Samoyeds cleverly surround them, often taking advantage of the dense sea fog to do so, and quietly drive them into a netted enclosure on the shore, where they are killed at leisure. One of these grand drives, witnessed by Mr. Trevor Batty, resulted in the capture of upwards of 3,000 Brents. A form or variety of the Brent goose, with the underparts below the breast nearly white, is commonly found consorting with birds of the typical colour. It is the bernicula glaucogaster of Brehm, and, as far as is known, breeds only in the near Arctic region. It is not known to differ in its habits from the more typical form. Barnacle Goose. This somewhat larger species, the Anas leucopsis of Bechstein, and the Anser leucopsis of most modern naturalists, is a fairly common winter visitor to the British coasts, where it is most abundant on the western littoral, from Cornwall up to the Hebrides. Unlike the Brent, the Barnacle Goose frequently wanders inland to winter on large sheets of fresh water. This goose is readily distinguished by its white cheeks and much lighter underparts below the breast. Owing to peculiarities of distribution, rather perhaps than to choice, the Barnacle Goose frequents more rocky coasts than its ally. It is also just as gregarious, but owing to the nature of its food is more of a land species, and certainly more nocturnal in its habits. Although frequenting sandbanks and mudflats to sleep and to rest, it does not obtain much food upon them. Its food is principally composed of marsh grass, and to obtain this it comes up from the sea to the saltings, and the banks of lakes and tidal rivers. Its flight and actions generally very closely resemble those of the Brent Goose. The note is similar. Nothing is known of the breeding grounds or the nesting habits of the Barnacle Goose. It has, however, been known to breed in confinement. The eggs are creamy white. Swans. These large and handsome birds form the small but well-defined subfamily Cygninae. They may be distinguished from all other species in the Anatidae by having the lores, or space between the eye and the base of the bill, bare of feathers, and by their reticulated tarsus. In this subfamily, as in the Anserinæ, the sexes are nearly alike in colour. Swans moult only once in the year, in autumn. The young birds, known as cygnets, are hatched covered with down, and able to swim. In first plumage they are uniform greyish-brown, and, unlike the geese, they appear not to undergo any moult during their first autumn, but after the moult, which takes place in their second autumn, they acquire the pure white plumage of the adult. Although this subfamily contains but 7 species, probably all referable to one genus, its distribution is wide, embracing the Palarctic, Nearctic, Neotropical, and Australian regions. Besides the mute swan, 2 of the species are British, in the sense of visiting our area to winter. Hooper Swan. This fine bird, the Cygnus musicus of Bechstein, as well as most modern ornithologists, is a tolerably common winter visitor to the British Islands, frequenting inland waters as well as the coasts. It is of more frequent occurrence in Scotland than in England or Ireland. The Hooper, sometimes rendered Hooper, or Whistling Swan, both names being derived from the bird's notes, may be distinguished from its 2 British allies by having the basal portion of the bill extending below the nostrils, yellow. Like many of the species that visit us during winter from the high north, its numbers vary a good deal in different years, according to the mildness or severity of the winter in regions lying directly north or north east of our area. In periods of long continued frost, great numbers of this Swan collect off certain parts of our coasts, driven seawards from inland waters. This Swan is rarely seen in British waters before October or November, whilst in some years it does not make its appearance in certain localities before mid-winter. Its spring migration northwards lasts through April and May. Whilst on passage the flocks of this species form into some reticilinear figure and fly at vast heights. Gatke remarks that at Heligoland this Swan is seen most frequently during long continued frost, flights of 10, 20 or more passing in long rows, one behind the other, uttering their loud clanging cries as they go. The flight of this species is rapid and regular, the swish swish of the long wings being heard for a long distance, and the bird's long neck outstretched. There are few more graceful birds on the water than the Mute Swan, with its arched neck and raised plumes, yet the Hooper is even ungainly looking, the neck being held straight. Hoopers are shy and wary birds, and generally keep well out from the shore, except when feeding. The food of this Swan is mostly of a vegetable nature, aquatic plants and grasses, but insects and molluscs are also eaten. Its note sounds almost like the short blast of a trumpet, uttered in succession. The Hooper Swan breeds in the Arctic regions of Europe and Asia, its favourite resorts being the islands in the deltas of the great rivers that flow into the Northern Ocean, or on the banks of the great lakes on the tundras, or beside one of the many creeks or inlets spreading out from the main rivers. This Swan pairs for life. The huge nest is composed of coarse grass and other herbage piled up on the ground, and often increased in bulk as incubation proceeds. The eggs, from 3 to 7 in number, are creamy white in colour and rough in texture. Bewick Swan. Long confused with the preceding Swan, the distinctness of the present species was recognised by Yarrell, who named it Cygnus bewicki, in honour of Thomas Bewick, naturalist and engraver on wood, known to most readers as the author of British Birds and British Quadrupeds. Bewick's Swan is only a winter visitor to the coasts and inland waters of the British Islands, spending the summer far away in the Arctic regions of Europe and Asia. The habits of this Swan are very similar to those of the preceding species. The bird may be distinguished from the Hooper by its much smaller size, and by the yellow patch at the base of the bill being much less in extent, never extending below the nostrils. Bewick's Swan is perhaps not quite so maritime as the Hooper, preferring the large inland sheets of water, and more or less sheltered lochs and fjords, to the open sea. It is seen in greatest numbers in Ireland and Scotland, and during severe winters visits us in greatest numbers. At these times, some of the flocks are remarkably large, numbering hundreds or even thousands of individuals. Its food is not known to differ from that of the preceding species. Its flight is equally rapid, and its note, short and musical, has been syllabled as tong. Imposing as these birds are, and by no means rare, they can scarcely be classed as very prominent features of the bird life of the sea, so far as ordinary observation goes. Bewick's Swan reaches its Arctic summer haunts towards the end of May. Although its eggs have been obtained on the islands in the deltas of the Petchora and the Yenisei, these were taken by unscientific observers. Mr. Trevor Batty, so far as I know, was the first naturalist to see the egg and take the eggs of Bewick's Swan, on the island of Kolguev, of which he gives a beautiful figure. He describes as a mound, about 2½ feet high, and 4½ feet in diameter at the base, perfectly smooth, and tapering to the circular top, which was not more than 2 feet across. It was made of little bunches of green moss, with a few scraps of lichen, and a little dry grass piled up with the moss. The cavity at the top was lined with dead grass, mixed with a little down. The nest contained 3 eggs. These are smaller and whiter than those of the Hooper. End of Section 8.